When it comes to men's lifestyle, I think Thrillist Media Group pretty much has it covered. Recent article in Ad Age listed its sites in food and drink and travel and technology, lifestyle-based super compressor, and men's fashion portal, Jack Threads. Combined tally in January was over 14 million unique visitors. And I couldn't be more pleased to have Ben Lerer here with us today. He's CEO and co-founder of Thrillist Media Group. And he's going to talk about bridging content and commerce. And I talked a little about Superman earlier this morning. Well, when you think about Ben's early accomplishments at his age, Ernst & Young's Entrepreneur of the Year. He was named Crane's 40 Under 40. He was on Forbes' lists of the most powerful CEOs under 40. He's got a tremendous amount to share. He's a brilliant thinker. He's an entrepreneur. He's collaborative. And please give a really warm welcome to Ben Lerer. So Ben, come on out. Great to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
What's up? Does this works? I promised I wouldn't say this, but it's so cold back there. There's a mistreatment of speakers thing going on. It's terrible. I'm freezing cold. Okay, cool. So I have 19 minutes, so I'm going to go pretty fast here. This is a presentation, sort of a weird form of presentation I gave last week at South by that was 45 minutes. So I don't know how this is going to work, but I'm going to try my best. So at a really high level, I think sort of what you guys are supposed to take away from this is that there's a big change happening in media right now. And specifically, I believe that there is an opportunity that media businesses have to totally reinvent their business models and change the way that they communicate with their audiences. And while that's awesome for media companies like us and like a lot of you guys out here, I think that there's also more interesting things that ultimately come out of this for how brands can think about engaging with consumers through these media businesses that fits more neatly into the 4A's transformation theme of the day. So I'm just going to jump right in and first talk about some sort of high-level ideas that I think are ultimately what sort of underpin the changes that are happening. And so first of all, if you think about what digital provides for versus most traditional media, and so a commonality between TV, print, radio, outdoor, et cetera, is that where you're inspired and where you consume content is ultimately pretty far removed from where you actually make a purchase. And so you have to go and sort of jump through a bunch of hoops to go from actually consuming content to going and transacting. And digital, for the first time, provides the opportunity for those two things to really come together, which is one of the main opportunities that digital media businesses have as they think about new ways to monetize and engage their audiences. And so beyond just the point of inspiration and purchasing coming together, think about what a media business's asset actually is. And at the end of the day, it's its relationship with its audience and ultimately its influence over that audience. And if you think about what media businesses, sort of what they do is they rent that relationship to brands. And brands come and take advantage of that relationship through, sometimes really good integrations and sometimes really shitty integrations. And a lot of the time really shitty integrations. And we at Thrillist sort of have this belief that a media business's asset is actually exactly what all retail businesses want. If you're selling a product, what you're really trying to do is build a relationship with a customer base who trusts you and who does what you suggest and who ultimately buys your products. And so media businesses are perfectly positioned to build transactional relationships. They already have the audience. They have that they have a way of speaking to that audience and building trust with that audience. And so if you think about the first point where inspiration and purchasing have come together in the same actual physical experience and the idea that media companies know how to engage and build trust better than any other kind of businesses, it leads you further down the funnel of realizing that media companies have a really unique opportunity to start to actually directly build transactional relationships with their users. And then on top of that, just think about the millennial consumer, which, by the way, at some point, everyone is going to be the millennial consumer. People who consume content in feeds primarily. The idea of a destination website or a destination shopping experience is slowly starting to go away, or some people might argue quickly starting to go away. And the idea that content and commerce lives together in a social feed is something that all customers understand. And so while business units would prefer not to have to delineate between the two, and they say, or would prefer to delineate between the two, we're a content business or we're a commerce business, customers don't care. They're used to consuming these things in one place. And so it opens up the opportunity not just for a sort of clever business model, but actually for a new way of engaging that customers demand. And so when you put that all together, I think the idea that a media business today can stop thinking just about share of attention and start to think about share of wallet is interesting on a number of levels, not just because it creates a better business for the publisher, but actually because a media business that understands share of wallet is a better place for brands to ultimately spend money. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how that works at Thrillist, as well as sort of how I think there's broader applications beyond Thrillist. And so hopefully every single person in here reads Thrillist every day and has for the last 9 years. Show of hands for people who read it every single day for the last 9 years. 2 people, not even my head of sales. Pretty upset about this. We started Thrillist about 9 years ago as a media business, really sort of one-dimensional in that the only way we thought about monetizing our audience was through selling advertising. And we built a base of users who trusted us, who did what we suggested. Our content was always very service-focused, so we gave guys information that they could use to ultimately figure out how they spent their time and their money across a bunch of lifestyle categories that they cared about. And so we built this trusted relationship, and we had all this anecdotal feedback that guys actually did what we suggested, but we weren't necessarily getting sort of compensated in that way by our advertising partners. And we started to think about new ways that we could potentially monetize the relationship that we had because we saw the challenges in the advertising industry, specifically the digital advertising industry. And so you guys know these stats. They're somewhat horrifying to brand publishers who are creating these really deep relationships and these really immersive ad products, when at the end of the day, even as more and more dollars flood online, a lot of these dollars are going towards buying sort of data-driven, audience-driven programs rather than going and doing these really sort of high-impact, really immersive programs, the kind of stuff that we were doing. And ultimately, as you think about building a scalable media business in today's world and building a new kind of media business, you find yourself sort of trying to figure out new ways to engage and new streams of monetization beyond just advertising. And I think a few years ago, we were really down on advertising. We were thinking that it was very hard to scale and we weren't sure what our next trick was going to be. And one day I was reading Thrillist and I saw an ad on Thrillist for a company called Jack Threads. And I was unfamiliar with Jack Threads. And I went to their website and they were selling clothing and accessories from brands that I was only familiar with because I had read about those brands editorially on Thrillist. And it was this aha moment where we said, we are awesome at building demand with a group of users. These guys have started to figure out the supply side. Wouldn't it be interesting if we sort of got close to this business and figured out how we could put the pieces together? And long story short, as we got to know Jack Threads, it turned out the reason that they were advertising is because the guys they were acquiring from Thrillist were the highest lifetime value customers they had. And we said, there's got to be something really big here. How do we think about it? Long story short, we bought Jack Threads, and over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, have actually built a retail arm inside of our media business. And it's worked. And we've built a large revenue stream that has allowed us to scale beyond beyond sort of the scale and size of a lot of the other media businesses that we ultimately were competing with and still on some level continue to compete with. And this is all well and good, and it means that we've found a way to scale our media business faster than guys who are only renting their audience. But that's really not the purpose of this talk today. What I think is more interesting, and a year ago at South by I gave a talk and I showed this slide and I said, advertising is tough and advertising is going to be this little chunk of your business and the real revenue is going to come from directly monetizing the user. And while I do believe that there's an awesome opportunity to directly monetize the user, I don't think that this is true anymore. And that I don't think that you have to think about your ad business as being this sort of somewhat unscalable little thing in today's world. And the reason for that is I believe that there's an opportunity for media businesses to get much closer to the customer's wallet. And in our case, the way that we talk to the community now is we talk about us being the media company that is closest to the customer's wallet because we have this transactional relationship. And I don't think that we are going to be the only folks doing this. And I'll talk a little bit about some other ones who are already doing it at the end, but for the purposes of this, I'm going to talk about some examples of sort of how being the media company that's closest to the customer's wallet actually benefits brands and doesn't just benefit us. And so the way that we sort of have presented our offering to brands is what we call story selling. And so every publisher and every brand wants to be great at storytelling. Because we are connected to the full purchasing funnel, we talk about storytelling, but very purposefully. And so the idea that when we create content, we're moving a user from just being sort of aware of a product really down the funnel, moving towards intent. And for us, purchase intent is the metric that we think about all day long. And ultimately, it's a metric that I think brands can really hang their hat on when they think about measuring success with their digital marketing programs. And so I'm going to talk about a few specific examples, but they're really illustrative of, I think, a much bigger opportunity, which is a way for publishers to think about building brands into the commerce flow in a way that adds value to the customer. And so this is an example of a program that we did with Showtime around the Ray Donovan show. And we've done this with a number of programs over the last year. But what this represents is us actually integrating a brand into the purchasing funnel at a super high sort of impact moment. And so in this case, customers have already gone, they filled out all of their credit card information and decided that they're gonna make a purchase. And based on really specific targeting parameters that are given to us by a brand, we're able to use first-party data to pop a specific message. So in this case, if you were in certain markets during certain times of day, buying certain brands, clothing, that fit a very specific sort of targeting criteria for Showtime, we would actually pop a message that Showtime had picked up your order. And what you end up getting here is a super high value interaction where a vast percentage of people who see this interaction ultimately end up going and sharing out to social, thanking the brand, and drive a huge, huge, huge spike in sort of intent to view the program. And this is a really high impact one because you actually have to go and pick up the order, but applying this into the funnel in all different kinds of ways around, people buying in specific markets, around giving someone an upgraded shipping experience, or giving someone access to a product that they didn't have access to, or a gift with purchase, is a really interesting way to be what we think of as sort of the good kind of disruptive. And so most advertising, I'm sorry I'm going fast, but this clock is ticking fast. Most advertising is the bad kind of disruptive. It is ultimately the price that the customer has to pay for free content is to be subjected to this crap. And we believe in sort of the good kind of disruption, which is to actually surprise and delight the user. And a media business who makes a large amount of money, or in our case, and in I think many cases in the future, more money off of the consumer rather than the advertiser, what you end up doing is self-correcting. You don't go and do shitty ad programs. You actually create ad programs where the brands that you work with add value to the customer's life because that's where the revenue is for you. You can't screw up your relationship with the customer or the reader because you don't just lose the advertiser, you actually lose the transaction. And so other examples of how a commerce business or a media business that has commerce can integrate brands in ways that are real value adds for the customer. I'm sure you guys, I don't know if GE has spoken yet, but I suspect they'll be speaking here because they do a good job of speaking at these type of things. We've partnered with GE last year to create a program around what we call the moon boots. And so GE wanted to be associated with the anniversary of the moon landing. And we created a content series around all the ways that the moon landing has sort of changed society and changed technology and all that good stuff, and how GE's involvement was super important, and created what we think of as a best-in-class branded content program. On top of that, though, we actually went and created a physical product with GE where we took the materials that they had used in the moon boot that Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong and the other dudes wore, and actually, I don't know their names, and created a physical item that we sold to our customers. And so we created $20,000 in moon boots. We sold them out in 7 minutes. and actually created like a cultural moment where if you were a Jack Threads user, you were the only people who had access to this incredible product. They're now for sale on eBay for like $1,500 or $2,000. And while it's a sort of small example, it's a program that we're starting to scale and that I think retail media businesses are going to be able to do in a bunch of different ways. And so another quick example is something that we did recently with Archer, a comic show. So there's not an actual actor in it, but we created the shirt that he wears on the show in partnership with Archer. We sold 1,000 of them overnight, generated tens of millions of social impressions around this. But then again, it comes back to data. We were able to, at the end of this campaign, we know who the biggest fans of Archer are, as well as who still love Archer and thought that this was a really clever idea and interacted with it. And taking that data and putting it up into, like rolling that up into a DMP, we're able to go and take the custom content that we create and push this out in a much more purposeful and much more targeted way that ultimately is going to allow us to drive that purchase intent lift across a wide range of users. And so I'm going to speed up a little bit here. I'm going to skip this one because I don't have enough time. One more quick example is the idea of sampling and the idea of actually physically putting products in people's hands. And so we've gotten pretty good at figuring out how to actually take products from a brand who we work with and in a really sort of targeted way put those products in front of the right customers. And so you see these examples. These are actually born out of a program that we did with Tide. And the Tide program was interesting because we went and created a content series around how to care for super colorful clothing. And that content might not be interesting to everybody, but we distributed that content to people who were shopping for super colorful clothing. When you then bought super colorful clothing, we put a Tide Pod into the package with instructions for how to use it and drove research on the back and showed that a vast majority of people who actually received that product intended to buy the Tide Pod the next time they purchased detergent. And that movement from just creating awareness that Tide Pods is a product that you could use to clean your clothing that's incrementally easier, to actually physically sampling product with people who then come back and say, this was a better experience, I intend to buy this in the future, is one of the ways that we think about working with brands to add value beyond just sort of the content layer. And at the end of the day, though, this really comes down to data. This comes down to how valuable a data set can a media company have when they don't just have consumption data, but when they actually have purchasing data, when they have millions of credit card numbers on file or home addresses. And while you don't want to use that in sort of a creepy, personally identifiable way, you do want to be able to create custom audiences where you're able to take the data that you have around your audience and really understand how they spend their money, why they spend their money, and start to activate that data to help brands move down the funnel and actually engage in a deeper way. And for us, what's exciting and why I think you're going to see even some slower moving traditional guys move into this space is because it provides an opportunity for media businesses to ultimately scale faster. The content and commerce programs that we do are 3.5 times larger than the straight content programs because there are more proof points, because they are more engaging and immersive and more valuable ultimately. And so what this speaks to is an opportunity for us to actually make more money in our media business, to invest into creating more good content, which ultimately begets more sales on the commerce side, which brings us more data, and you create this really healthy cycle where the media business feeds the commerce business feeds the media business, and ultimately you end up with a bigger company and a better relationship with your customer that, if you are smart about it, you can use on behalf of your brand partners to actually engage in ways that other media companies aren't doing. And for us, that means maximum monetization, which is great. But I think more important than that, for the media partners, it actually means results. And so it means that we are legitimately able to drive purchasing intent that, again and again, measured through third-party data, is best in class. And it's because of the data and because of the ad programs that actually interact with the funnel and interact with physical product that touches consumers and moves beyond these sort of fleeting online experiences. And with the 2 minutes I have left, I'm going to talk about how we're not the only ones doing this. And I'm going to use 2 examples of companies that I'm an investor in, so totally self-serving. But I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Into the Gloss. It's a women's beauty site. And They built a really great audience, albeit a small audience, of women who cared a lot about beauty products and cared a lot about sort of, beauty and what it means for them and beauty and culture and blah, 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 blah. And they built this awesome audience and this awesome relationship with these women, but actually came to understand these women in a really sort of fundamental way, and through that birthed a physical brand called Glossier that they launched, that they exclusively distribute, that is interwoven into their media brand. And so they're still an advertising-supported business, but they're an advertising-supported business at the top of the funnel, but they also have this transactional relationship. And I believe that this makes them a more valuable place for brands to ultimately come and spend money, because they have quantifiably proven that they have a different kind of relationship than other media companies do with these users, because they have different data, and because at the end of the day, they have the opportunity to go and do different kind of immersive ad programs like the ones I mentioned that we're doing. And this is one example. Another example is a company called Brit & Co., a woman named Britt Morin, who's sort of a Martha Stewart of makers for like the digital age, has built a really interesting business where she's built a ton of great content, really engaging content around the maker movement. But on top of that, has actually started to create classes where she's selling a digital good, sort of a virtual good, but she's creating classes that teach people how to put this stuff together. And she's also building a marketplace where she's selling the products that women need to use, or I guess some guys, to build, to sort of make stuff. And so really, it's still early innings here. We're having success with it, but I think what's more exciting than us sort of creating this new revenue stream is actually the opportunity that we have around being able to offer brands access into this really valuable relationship. And so I did it. 20 minutes. Oh, forget this example. I didn't exactly do it. Thanks, guys.